Let me guess. It's 6:47 p.m., you're working, and somehow
Nothing moved.
you didn't get distracted. Your attention slipped one browser tab at a time, and you didn't even notice it happening. And this is where everything quietly breaks. Focus doesn't fail loudly. It fails while you still think you're working. By the time you realize something's wrong, the work session is already compromised. So you blame motivation, or discipline, or yourself.
But none of those are the mechanism.
What actually happened is simpler and more uncomfortable. Your attention system shifted states before you were aware of it.
No decision, no failure moment.
Just a gradual leak you were never taught to monitor. And unless you understand where that leak starts, you'll keep trying to fix the wrong problem at the wrong time. In a moment, I'll show you exactly how that leak forms, why it feels invisible, and why most productivity advice can't stop it. First, you need to see focus for what it actually is. Most people think focus fails when you notice it. It doesn't. It fails earlier. Your attention can drift before awareness turns on. You're still looking at the screen, still reading, still working, but part of your mind has already switched modes. That's why this feels confusing. You don't remember choosing distraction, Manos, because the system already switched modes. This is the first leak, attention drift. And once you understand it, the rest of your focus problems start to make sense. Here's what's actually happening. Your brain doesn't experience focus as a single on-off state. It operates through multiple modes that trade control back and forth depending on energy cost. One mode is externally directed, reading, writing, solving. Another is internally directed, planning, replaying, simulating, drifting. The critical detail is this. The switch between those modes happens before conscious awareness. As task difficulty rises or mental energy drops, the system quietly looks for relief, not by stopping work, but by loosening engagement. Attention starts sampling other thoughts. Not enough to feel like distraction, just enough to reduce effort. That's why this leak is so hard to detect. You still feel at your desk. You're still typing. You still believe you're working. But the quality of attention has already changed. This creates the attention drift illusion. You believe focus failed at the moment you noticed it. In reality, it failed minutes earlier while you were still convinced everything was fine. Now notice what most advice tells you to do at that point. Try harder, refocus, eliminate distractions, force yourself back in. But that advice assumes awareness leads the process. It doesn't. Awareness lags behind it. By the time you're consciously trying to refocus, you're already dealing with accumulated cognitive load. The task feels heavier, the resistance feels personal, and effort feels unusually expensive. This is why focus feels fragile on bad days. Not because you're weaker, but because the system is already operating closer to its limits. Small increases in effort trigger early drift, and if you don't catch that drift early, something else starts happening. Your mind keeps running the last thing it touched. This is the second leak, Menos, and it's the one destroying most work sessions.
Attention residue.
Attention residue is what happens when your mind leaves a task, but the task doesn't leave your mind. You switch from task A to task B, but part of your attention stays behind, still processing, still evaluating, still unfinished. Even when the switch feels small, checking a message, glancing at a tab, the residue is real. This is why quick checks are never quick. They don't just take time, they leave cognitive drag. Your system now has two active processes, one in the foreground, one in the background. Neither gets full bandwidth. Performance drops, not because you're incapable, but because capacity is being split. And the more often you switch, the more residue accumulates. Each switch adds a little more fog. Not enough to feel dramatic, just enough to make everything feel harder than it should. This is where most people misread the signal. They feel the fog and assume fatigue or boredom or lack of interest. So they switch again, looking for relief. That creates a loop. Switching increases residue. Residue increases cognitive load. Cognitive load makes the current task feel heavier, and heavier tasks trigger more switching. This is the context switching trap. Notice how none of this involves laziness or poor discipline. It's just system behavior under repeated transitions. And here's the part that matters. Attention residue doesn't clear itself automatically.
It clears when the system gets a sense of closure.
Not completion, closure. If a task ends cleanly, the system powers it down. If it ends ambiguously, it keeps running in the background, consuming bandwidth. That's why unfinished tasks feel mentally loud.
They're not distractions. They're open processes.
This leads directly to the third leak, open loops, and why your mind won't stop pinging you even when you're trying to focus. Open loops are what keep attention occupied even when nothing obvious is happening. An open loop is any goal, task, or problem your brain considers unresolved. It doesn't matter whether it's important or small. If the system thinks something is incomplete, it keeps it active. This is why unfinished tasks don't just sit quietly in the background. They keep pinging for resolution, not as clear thoughts, but as tension, restlessness, or a vague sense that you're forgetting something. That signal pulls bandwidth away from whatever you're trying to do now. Most people describe this as having a lot on their mind. What's actually happening is that multiple goal processes are running at the same time. Each one consumes a small amount of attention. Individually, they're manageable. Together, they create constant interference. This is the background applicativo effect. Your system is trying to multitask at the goal level, not the action level. And the cost shows up as reduced focus, slower thinking, and mental fatigue that feels disproportionate to the work you're doing. This is also why telling yourself to relax or ignore it doesn't work. Open loops aren't emotional, they're structural. The system keeps them active because it doesn't know when they'll be handled. What actually reduces the interference is not finishing the task, but giving the system a clear next step. When you write something down and define the very next action, you're not being organized. You're signaling closure. You're telling the system, this is handled for now. Once that happens, the background process quiets down. Not because the problem is solved,
But because it's contained.
bandwidth returns to the task in front of you. This is why externalizing tasks works even when you're exhausted. It doesn't rely on self-control. It reduces cognitive load directly. But there's another layer that makes modern focus especially fragile. Your environment is training your reward system every day. Your environment is constantly training your reward system. Every notification, feed, and alert delivers fast, unpredictable feedback. That trains your brain to expect frequent reward updates. Over time, slow, effortful work starts to feel unusually unrewarding, even if it used to be tolerable. This isn't a motivation problem. It's a reward timing problem. Your system has learned a faster baseline, so when you sit down to do deep work, the task itself hasn't changed. Your expectations have. The mismatch makes the work feel heavier than it objectively is, which increases the likelihood of drift, switching, and open loops reactivating. At this point, most people think they're broken. They're not. They're operating inside an environment that constantly increases cognitive load and raises the cost of sustained attention. And the mistake is trying to fix this with more effort. Effort is the most expensive lever you have. The rest of this video is about how to redesign your focus system so it survives low energy, high noise, and bad days without relying on willpower. Next, I'll show you how to seal these leaks using a simple architectural framework that works even when motivation is gone. If you try to fix focus by increasing effort,
You'll keep losing.
effort only works when energy is high and conditions are clean. Real systems are built for the opposite. They're built to survive low energy, noise, and inconsistency. So the goal isn't to stay focused. The goal is to design a system that loses less attention over time. That requires 3 structural moves. The first is early leak detection. Since attention drifts before awareness, you can't wait until you feel distracted. You need a low-cost way to check the system while it's still functioning. That's why simple meta questions work. Not am I focused, but what am I thinking about right now? That single question surfaces state drift without requiring effort. It turns awareness into a background process instead of an emergency response. The second move is hard boundaries between tasks. Every task needs a clear ending, even if it's temporary. When you stop without closure, attention residue carries over. When you stop with a defined next action, the system powers the task down. This isn't about productivity aesthetics, it's about preventing background processing from eating bandwidth. The third move is environmental reward control. If your environment constantly delivers fast novelty, your brain will expect fast feedback. That expectation makes slow work feel painful, which increases drift and switching. Reducing novelty before focus sessions isn't self-denial, it's baseline reset. You're lowering the system's reward expectations so effortful work doesn't feel disproportionately costly. Notice what all 3 moves have in common. None of them require motivation. None of them depend on discipline. They change the conditions under which your attention operates. This is what most advice misses. Focus isn't a personal trait, it's an outcome of architecture. Once you accept that, the metric changes. You stop judging your days by intensity or output. You start judging them by survivability. Did the system hold together under stress? Did it leak less attention than it used to? Did it recover quickly when it drifted? Progress isn't staying locked in. Progress is returning with low friction.
That's the difference between a system and a mood.
And once you build for survivability, bad days stop derailing you. They become just another operating condition the system already expects. At the end of this video, I'll compress all of this into a single filter you can use to evaluate any focus advice instantly. If it doesn't pass that filter, it's not worth your energy. Before that, there's one more hidden drain we need to address. It's subtle, it's common, and it's why even well-designed systems can still feel heavy. It's the cost of micro-decisions. Micro-decisions are the last major drain. Not big choices, small ones. When to start, what to do next, whether to continue. Each decision adds cognitive load, individually negligible, collectively expensive. This is why light, fragmented work often feels more tiring than one hard task. The cost isn't difficulty.
It's choice.
This is also where the idea of decision fatigue gets misused. There isn't a single willpower tank. There's accumulated decision load. Unresolved choices keep competing for attention and increase drift. Effective systems remove decisions before they appear. Start times are fixed, first actions are predefined, stop points are clear. When these are decided in advance, attention stabilizes automatically. Now zoom out. Attention drifts before awareness. Switching creates residue. Open loops consume bandwidth. Novelty pressure raises reward expectations. Micro-decisions add friction.
None of these fail loudly.
They fail quietly and continuously. So here's the correct frame. Focus is not something you summon. It's something your system either supports or degrades. If a strategy only works when energy is high, it isn't a system, it's a mood. A real focus system reduces cognitive load, seals leaks early, and makes returning to the task cheap. That's why you lose focus without noticing. Not because you're broken, because attention leaks when systems aren't designed for it. Next, I'll show you how to build a leak-resistant focus setup with the lowest possible effort. Here's the single filter to keep. If a focus method depends on you feeling clear, motivated, or disciplined, it will fail silently. Not because you did anything wrong, but because attention doesn't fail under effort. It fails under load. Real focus systems are designed around leak reduction, not intensity. They assume low energy. They assume interruptions. They assume bad days. And they still hold. So stop asking, how do I focus better? Start asking, where is attention leaking and how do I seal it with the least effort possible? That shift alone removes self-blame and replaces it with leverage.
Focus isn't fragile. It's structural.
When structure is right, consistency stops being heroic. It becomes the default. In the next video, I'll walk you through building a leak-resistant focus setup step by step, starting with changes that take under 5 minutes and work even when you're exhausted. No motivation, no hacks.
Just architecture that holds.